Jenny Geer. I'm a member of Indivisible Westchester and a co-leader of the Indivisible Westchester group Blue Blast, and you are watching Meet the Candidates with Shelley Mayer. Very happy to be here with my state senator, Shelley Mayer, and we're going to spend the next half hour talking about some of the issues. So welcome.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here, an opportunity to come back and talk about this current race, which I'm in again, for the Senate in November.
Right. So maybe you could start by explaining to us exactly how the district looks, because it's not just Larchmont and Mamaroneck, is it?
Correct. So this is a seat that was currently held by current County Executive George Latimer, and when he was elected to be County Executive, it created a vacancy in his Senate seat, the 37th Senate District. It runs from the Bronx border in Yonkers all the way up to Bedford, through all the Sound Shore communities, as well as Tuckahoe, Eastchester, the southern part of New Rochelle, northern part of New Rochelle. In addition to the Sound Shore, obviously Larchmont, Mamaroneck, Rye, Portchester, the southern part of White Plains, the northern part of White Plains, and Armonk and Bedford. It is a long, thin, funny-shaped district, a lot of driving, and a lot of different communities, each of which has their own concerns. And I have done my best since I was elected on April 24th to get out to each of the communities in the district and have people get to know me and feel comfortable letting me know what they're concerned about, because that's my job.
That's wonderful. Well, that's a big district.
Yes, it is.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for people who don't know you? How did you get involved in public service, and what have you been doing?
Well, so I grew up in Yonkers, and my father was a candidate frequently for elected office. So I got steeped in local politics, and I think I took very seriously the opportunity and the responsibility and the great opportunity we have as Americans to participate at a local level. I became an attorney. I was in the Attorney General's office. I was the head of the Attorney General's Westchester office. And I've always been involved in sort of local activism. And I was very fortunate in 2012, after moving back to Yonkers, after living in White Plains for 12 years, to be able to run for and win for the New York State Assembly. And I've served in the Assembly for the last 6 years. And I've tried to build a reputation on issues of education, taxation, family issues, particularly families and children. And when this opportunity came to run for what had been George's seat, and it's a wonderful legacy, I jumped in, and I was very, very fortunate to have so much support, such that I'm running again this November. I don't have a Republican adversary, but it is my responsibility to campaign and let people know what I stand for, and have this opportunity to get better known in the bigger district.
Yeah. Well, and so you mentioned you were elected in the special election in April, and
Correct.
You won by a very wide margin of 16 points. And you have attributed that win to the big tent blue wave. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm a coalition builder by nature. I don't know, maybe it's having a lot of kids and grandchildren. I think we do better when we bring people together. So my view is we share many views in common, although we have differences. I'm obviously a proud Democrat, and I have a tradition of being a Democrat. I brought many loyal friends from the Democratic Party, many newcomers like the Indivisible community of resistance. That's how we met. That came about after Donald Trump was elected, who got engaged in local politics, may have been involved in voting in national elections, but all of a sudden said, you know, we're going to make a difference in our communities. I've brought them into the fold, I think, or I inherited that. I have a very strong labor base. I've been an outspoken person for working people and for unions. Some of them didn't agree. Many of them voted for Donald Trump for president. But at the end, they knew me as a fighter for working people, and they joined along. Together with also the diversity of the community. You know, Westchester is about 20% Latino, and they're a very important voice. They need to be part of this. And of course, our African American, our Indian American, our Muslim American. There's so many communities that haven't involved themselves. And I say the big tent because in my campaign, I had 3,000 volunteers. I had enormous energy, positive energy. of people saying we're going to get together and make a difference with someone who we think will represent us well. Again, we're not going to agree with her all the time, but there's going to be respectful dialogue and a sense that New York needs to move in a progressive tradition. We need real Democrats to represent us in Albany, and we want a Democratic majority in the state Senate headed by Senator Stuart Cousins, who's my friend and neighbor in Yonkers, and a voice for a very reasonable, thoughtful, but progressive Democratic state Senate.
Yeah, well, I can certainly attest to the level of involvement.
Oh, you work so hard.
Lots and lots of people have and you were very welcoming of all of the new people who got involved.
Well,
last year.
One of the wonderful things about running was I got to meet all these new people and sort of felt embraced by them, and I think it was a two-way street. And I think when you get out there and you meet people and talk to people and you're not afraid of, the differences that we have, we are all very much Westchester residents who want this place to do well. We want Westchester to be an affordable place where people can move, own a home or a co-op, send their kids to school and feel good about it. And so we shared that, and I felt so embraced, thank you, from the new people who met me.
So there's an awful lot of different governments we have to keep track of, and so leaving aside the federal government, we've got the local municipalities, we've got county government, we've got state government. Can you talk a little bit about your duties as a state senator and what your responsibility is as our state senator?
Well, I appreciate that, because I think it's not fair to expect that everyone is going to understand all these levels of government. So there's an assembly at the level of state government, an assembly which has 150 members, a Senate which has 63 members, and the governor. And I was in the assembly where the Democrats were the majority, a veto-proof majority. Now I'm in the Senate where the majority is hanging in the balance. We're hopeful we're going to have the majority of the 63. The Senate meets regularly between January and June, and then as called back either by the governor or the majority leader. The current majority leader is John Flanagan, Republican from Long Island. We go from January to June to Albany 3 to 4 days a week. We consider legislation. Between January and March, we consider the state budget, which is probably the most important thing we do, adopt a very large budget and decide about education spending, health care, all of our social programs, whether they are senior programs, veterans programs, domestic violence programs. Then we also deal with legislation that affects, honestly, so many things, whether it's from our criminal justice and bail issues to the Reproductive Health Act, which I strongly support, to deal with protecting women's reproductive health in an era where it might be challenged by a new Supreme Court. So we have the budget and then the legislation. And the third sort of bucket of things you work on are things that the local municipalities that you represent care about and want you to do. So I was elected in April, and the Senate ended in June. I had 2 months. I did my best. I got a number of important pieces of legislation passed.
So for example, what did you get accomplished in those 2 months?
One of the things is for the town of Bedford, which is part of my district, in order to make a more effective use of their need for infrastructure investment, we passed a bill that allows them to use some of the facilities at the Bedford Women's Correctional Facility, which is a state facility in their town, as an opportunity for joint water treatment plant. Rather than having to build their own, now we're going to make a smarter decision about using the existing plant, which can use some of the needs of Bedford. So that's one thing. It sounds like it should be a no-brainer. Each of these things takes time. We did a bill that would allow Portchester and a number of other municipalities to have access on an anonymous basis to water usage by private water companies. That will allow towns and villages to apply for infrastructure money, knowing how much water is used by a commercial person, commercial entity, a residential person, and how to basically go forward and try to get money for infrastructure. Mamaroneck, Larchmont, all of these localities need to invest in their infrastructure. We want to give them the tools to do so. I have another bill currently pending before the governor. It's a small thing, but it matters to me, which would allow a contribution of money towards ALS, the disease ALS fund. I have an extraordinary leader on ALS in my Yonkers part of my district, who's been one of the lead spokespeople about the need for investment in research. And so it touched my heart, and I've been pushing for it for a long time. Obviously, next year, hopefully we're in the majority, and I can have a more substantive program on the issues that really matter, including gun violence, Reproductive Health Act, Child Victims Act, things that I ran on. Unfortunately, unless you're in the majority, you don't have the opportunity to do these big policy issues.
Right, so those are the main priorities that you would have if you do win a majority?
Well, I'd say clearly one is the Reproductive Health Act. I mean, in the last week, we've seen this debate about whether Justice Kavanaugh is going to be confirmed. There's really legitimate reason to be concerned that Roe v. Wade, the principles of privacy in that case, are going to be undermined by a new Supreme Court. And what we've been trying to do is enshrine into New York law the constitutional principles of Roe v. Wade. We've been blocked by the Republicans, even though I think a number of them support the bill. If we get to the majority, this is absolutely imperative we do this now. Just put into the New York public health law, as opposed to the criminal law where the provisions currently stand, the basic provisions of the Roe v. Wade decision. So that's one important thing. Clearly on gun violence, and it came up in my campaign big time after Parkland.
Right.
We should pass the Extreme Risk Protection Order bill, which would allow a court to determine if someone is a risk to themselves or others and has a gun.
That's
and
the red flag
yes,
law.
And if there's a court decides, then the police can go and retrieve and take away guns from someone. And this is also a great protection against suicide and other risks of gun violence. And after Parkland, so many mothers, young mothers, came to me who expressed fear about school, which was supposed to be a safe place. We need to do much more, and we can, while not impeding gun owners' rights, to ensure we have safety. And that is limiting access to guns for those who are a risk to themselves or others. That's the second thing. The Child Victims Act. I mean, we've seen in the last 6 months terrible cases, old cases, where sexual abuse in the church and in other religious institutions came forward. We ought to protect these adult victims by giving them redress. Our law doesn't do that. We need to make a change. Again, we couldn't do it with a Republican majority. We absolutely should change that. Clearly on issues that I care about, education funding, I think we need to re-examine some of the way our school funding formula works, make sure that schools have the money to invest in security, but also in education. We have some of the best schools in the state in my new Senate district, and we have some of the most fiscally challenged, like Yonkers and Portchester. And we need to even that out. It shouldn't be that a kid that simply lives on the Yonkers border, as opposed to the Bronxville side, has a really qualitatively different opportunity. So I'm in favor of reviewing some of the basic provisions of the formula and equalizing or making it fairer without taking away from our top-notch school districts, which I strongly support, including Mamaroneck, and what a great school district it is.
Yeah,
and
it is.
Parents are lucky.
We are lucky.
Fortunate to have such a quality district.
So a lot of people are very cynical about Albany, and the favorite tagline is Albany corruption.
Right.
What can you say to people who think the system is just broken and are cynical about politics, especially in Albany?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is we have to have stronger ethics laws and stronger campaign finance laws. You shouldn't be able to sort of cheat with campaign financing by creating these limited liability corporations and pretend they're like people. So let's say I form 10 limited liability corporations. Each one could max out, give the maximum allowed to you as a candidate, but it's all me. That's not right. We should change that. We should prohibit that. The Senate Democrats have been for that. The Assembly passed it many times. We need to change that. I think we need stricter oversight of the way state monies are spent, particularly when they're off budget. In other words, they're in these sort of secret pockets. We should have a review of that and greater disclosure. I think that one thing is, and it's hard for people to believe, but hopefully when they get to know someone, like a George Latimer, or hopefully like me, and I found this to be my experience in Yonkers, even if they didn't agree with me, if I treated them respectfully, I appreciated their opinion, I listened to their personal story and gave it the credit it deserves, they felt less cynical about politics. Someone is listening and listening to me. There is a sense, no one really cares, they're all corrupt up there. That's in fact not the case. There are some really bad apples. A number of them are in jail, as they should be. There are both parties. Both parties have had really serious problems. But I think if we elect new people, and I believe the Senate Democratic majority is a breath of fresh air, and Senator Stewart Cousins is an extraordinarily ethical person, we're going to bring that. But I understand frustration. I think we do some campaign finance and ethics, stronger ethics laws, greater disclosure. But I always have to put in a word for some of the young members of the legislature who are fabulous and ought not to be tarnished with this, who really represent their communities smartly and with knowledge about what the issues of their constituents are. Let's give them a chance without the sort of tarnish of the old Albany. We need to change the mindset about it, and I hope I'm part of that.
And I think there are a lot of young people who are running.
So many young people.
Young Democrats are
and
running
new
for
people.
those state Senate seats.
Yes, we're encouraging new people to get in.
Yeah.
This is the opportunity for young people to step up. I know they talk about wait your turn. Sometimes I say, don't wait your turn, just jump in, because we need new voices.
And also, kind of on the same point, voter participation
Right.
in our elections is so low. I think New York is one of the lowest in the nation. What can we do about voter apathy, trying to get people to actually go to the polls in November?
Well, one thing we could do is change the laws and make it easier for people who are entitled to vote to vote. Early voting. They already started in a number of states for a November election. In New York, we could have voting where if you got out of work at 9 o'clock, you wouldn't be barred from voting because you couldn't get to the polling place from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and in many parts of our state from 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. So early voting, much easier absentee voting. We have a sort of ridiculous system where at least on paper you're supposed to have an excuse. Well, what about the excuse is it's easier for me to vote by absentee than to actually be there and to have my vote counted. So that we should do. I believe we should have much stronger voter registration, basically opt out. If you don't want to register, fine, but you're going to be presumed when you apply for a license, if you're over 18, to be registered to vote. We should encourage people into the system as much as possible, and I'm going to be proposing a bill that twice a year, every high school in the state have a voter registration day absolutely set aside where every 17 and 18-year-old is going to be encouraged, not mandated, to participate in registering to vote.
And you can do that through legislation?
We can. Got to get it passed.
That's true. So, and then also, I guess, a little more on the young people,
Yes.
getting them involved. So more voter registration drives in schools. What are some other ways that we can encourage young people? Because they're actually the segment of the population that votes the lowest.
least.
I think in 2014 it was 11% of voters under 34, which actually isn't even that young.
Well, one, I think we ought to see a good sign, which is in the last primary, 3 times as many Democrats voted, and credit to Indivisible and a lot of others for inching those numbers up so dramatically. I mean, it's really remarkable. 3 times as many on a Thursday. It wasn't even a Tuesday.
That's true.
So
an
credit
odd
to
day.
all the work that was done to encourage. And I know just since I've been elected, over 3,000 new people have registered to vote of all different parties and non-parties and whatever in my district. Now that
Wow.
is remarkable. So there
That is
is
amazing.
a tremendous interest in registering to vote, and we ought to do more. One thing I did during the campaign, I've kept it going, is create a youth advisory council of high school students throughout the district. From Larchmont, I have some fabulous students from Mamaroneck, Harrison, Port Chester, White Plains, Bedford, Yonkers, Bronxville. Put them in a room together and let's hear their ideas. They had great ideas, not only about gun violence, which is top of their list, but also about voter participation and trying to get away from the cynicism of young people about politics. Many of them don't think it affects their lives.
Right.
But whether it's marijuana, recreational marijuana, which is going to be something we debate next year, whether it is going to be criminal justice reforms in terms of bail, whether it's going to be the impact of any of these changes on reproductive health that are going to affect young women. We are going to be in the midst of issues that really affect them. So I'm thrilled we're going to have another meeting with them. I want to continue to broaden that. I think some of them worked on voter participation last night on my behalf. So I have to make sure we hear young people. At least I personally feel like they have a voice that needs to be part of this conversation.
Yeah. So what about how the rest of your constituents beyond the Youth Council, what can we do to help you help us? Because I'm not sure a lot of people really know how to interact with their local government.
Yes.
If they see this interview and they want to tell you something, what do they do?
Well, one is on the government side. I've moved into the office that Senator George Latimer had when he was senator at 222 Grace Church Street in Portchester. But this is about my campaign. I'm running for re-election. I'm very excited about it. This is an incredible opportunity and honor. And I should make sure that's said. I am very, very fortunate that I was elected to serve over 300,000 people and to be their voice. And to be a voice of responsible government. One thing we haven't talked about is to deal with the burden of property taxes in Westchester, which is a killer for so many of our seniors and working people. I'm very mindful of that. So I want to hear from people. I have a campaign website, Shelley Mayer 4, Senate.com, and my name is spelled SHELLEYMAYER. And I have a campaign email, Shelley Mayer 4 Senate, same with the number 4, @gmail.com. And if people want to email me or go on my website, hear a little more about my background, but certainly email me. I'm trying to make it my business to respond to every email within 24 hours. Love to come and meet people. The opportunity to meet new people is one of the great benefits of this job. If you like people, this is a dream come true.
So you kind of are following in George Latimer's footsteps, aren't you, with the block parties
Yeah,
and
I try.
the community events?
George had a wonderful style of being so present and people so responded. And it was very much my sort of style in my Yonkers world. And I'm trying to do it my way. But he's a wonderful model to follow because people, regardless of their ideas, had faith in him as a person, that he was going to be a person of goodwill who had their interests at heart. And, I'm very much a progressive person. I believe in we can do better for people, that government has a role. But I think there's a lot to be said for a very civil, democratic with a small d conversation. And that's the path I've been in. Again, I'm honored to serve, and I look forward to having another 2 years, the only 2-year term in the Senate.
So as you're working, when the session starts and there are different issues being debated, do you like to hear from your constituents if they're paying attention to hear how they feel? How do you find out, how do you represent your constituents on these issues and find out how they feel about them?
Well, that's a great question because I do try to read my Senate emails, which is smayor@nysenate.gov. Read them as frequently as I can, if not every day, and to respond. So people do weigh in about bills and about legislation and about policy and about budget decisions. And I've always found it's a very good way for people in your district to say, no, you have to pay attention to the Mamaroneck, we need the VFW, we need the Women's Center, we need our school after-school program, we need our immigrant protection programs money. So it's very important for people to speak up. You don't have to know everything, and you don't have to know really anything other than what your priorities are. And people can call my government office or email and let me know. And also, I'm happy to come out and meet and hear what they have to say and have a back and forth. I find that has informed me about the diversity of views. I mean, I have my own views, but I like to think I'm open-minded, and I certainly have an open door and an open mind about pretty much every issue. There's a few issues I've made up my mind on.
So are there any issues that we haven't covered that you think are
You know, we
worth
didn't talk about the
mentioning now?
environment, and we're
Oh,
sitting
that's a big
here
one.
right on the fabulous sound, which is a blessing of this job, that I get to experience this fantastic waterway. But we need to make sure we invest enough to make sure the water is in great quality, that the infrastructure along the shoreline is protected from flooding. We
Which we had a major storm. Actually, two major storms the past 2 weeks.
Yes, and we really, you know, I'm going to continue to press for not only infrastructure investment, but best practices in flood preparation and flooding technology. I don't think we are at the front end. The state has made some good steps forward, but we ought to be encouraging intermunicipal work on that. So climate change generally, I mean, we absolutely have to be in New York at the front end, not at the back end, and I'm pushing for higher standards of reusables, solar and wind. I just came back from Denmark where I saw offshore wind and how remarkable it is that they are basically moving to completely substitute it for most of their existing grid capacity. And so I think the environment has to be up there with our other social justice issues, or we won't have a planet to enjoy for my grandchildren and everybody else's.
Yes, well, we hope you'll be successful in that.
I hope so too.
So that's just about all the time we have. So
Thank you, Jenny.
To thank our Senator Shelley Mayer for coming and talking.
Everyone calls me Shelley, as you know.
Shelley, yes, Shelley, and I can attest to Shelley's engagement with the community because that's how we met.
That's how we met,
Yeah.
and I'm so appreciative. Thank
Yeah,
you so
yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.